Material Site is a project that I've been working on for the last couple of years, and this is the second manifestation of the installation of the project, and the first took place at the Northern Gallery of Contemporary Art, the NGCA in Sunderland. And the space there was very different. It was a really kind of large cavernous space, a kind of hermetic space. And the images and screens were built into a large scaffolding structure that kind of architecturally positioned itself around the concrete columns within the space. Here at Arts Catalyst it's very different. We're in this intense proximity to both the screens and the images, but the other huge difference is that the galleries here are on the street. We have these incredible windows that make it a really permeable space. So this relationship between the interior and the exterior has really interested me here, and it's one of the reasons why I've placed some of the seating out on the street, so the casual viewer as they move along the street has a relationship with the work as much as the viewer that comes into the space and experiences it. The project was funded by the Leverhulme Trust, and this allowed me the space and time to work with 3 world-leading facilities for fundamental science. Scientists working in physics, particle physics, cosmology, mathematics, astrophysics. What particularly interested me was these are areas of science that are really difficult for lay publics to actually connect to, both imaginatively and cognitively. They're often dealing with scales and distances that are so far beyond our human experience. So from the kind of macro scale of the universe to the incredibly small scale of neutrinos, of particles. Both these kind of stretch beyond our kind of human experience. What I'm trying to do through this project is explore how we might connect to these areas, not through illustrating the science, but through creating a kind of an experience where we can connect imaginatively and cognitively, but on a kind of visceral level almost. Although I've been working on this for the last couple of years, the actual genesis of the project goes back much further, probably almost a decade, when I first visited one of the sites, which is Bodily Underground Laboratory. And the laboratory is sited in Bolby Mine, which is one of the UK's deepest working mines. It's over 1 kilometre underneath the surface. And when I first visited there, I was really struck by the kind of the sheer physicality of the space. You have to travel that kilometre in a cage with the miners. It's an incredibly intense experience. It's very hot. It's incredibly noisy. That sort of intense physicality made me really think about the limits and capabilities of photography, and in a sense that idea of phenomenological failure of photography. I'm as interested in what photography can't do as to what it can, but also this idea that as a site, the underground mine was almost a kind of reverse of our conventional ideas of the sublime. You know, instead of this kind of vast exterior, you have this kind of intense interiority. one of the really important films that I made at Bowlby was taken from the bottom of the lift shaft and from a vehicle as it moved out underneath the seabed. So the mine stretches out about 15 kilometres underneath the sea towards the mining face. So this film is of a vehicle moving through those tunnels. So you just have this kind of relentless moving forward within the dark tunnels with the sound of the vehicle. Over the years, I started thinking about how my questions in relation to photography and to film and our ideas of perception started to map over the questions that the scientists were asking in these environments about the nature of perception, about the parts of our universe which we know about and the parts that are unseen. And what started to happen was that there was this kind of relationship built between the physicality of the site and the kind of invisibility, the intangibility of the science that was being performed there. And really this created the kind of conceptual core for the project. So one of the other sites I've been working with on this particular project is the Laboratory Nazionale di Gran Sasso, which is sited inside a mountain in central Italy. So it's actually one of the world's largest underground laboratory for particle physics, and it comprises of 3 vast halls where a number of different experiments are acting like huge observatories, huge underground sensors. Experiments need to be underground because they are shielded from cosmic rays that would ordinarily interfere with the sensing apparatus of the experiments. And then the third site I've been working with is the combined facilities of the Institute of Computational Cosmology and also the Centre for Advanced Instrumentation, which are both parts of Durham University. I was interested with working with both those facilities because they're involved in different ways with this idea of remote sensing. So the Institute of Computational Cosmology are involved in making visualizations and constructions of parts of the universe that we will never experience directly. So one of the films in the installation uses an animation that they have done from the very famous Hubble Deep Field image. And what they've done is they've animated that image so we are moving back through space and time towards the beginning of the universe, to just before the Big Bang. Really what I'm trying to do within the installations is to create an immersive experience of images, of moving images, and importantly of sound. And in this respect, the benches are a really important part of the work because they allow for a kind of choreography of that experience. And they also create a kind of haptic experience for the viewer. So there's a kind of a sense of duration that you can sit and watch, and you have this kind of sense of the material quality of the bench itself. But also there's this sense of moving from one place to another within the installation through the mechanism of the soundtracks. we're kind of forced back into the inhabitation of our bodies, and we feel the temperature of the benches, and we experience the soundtrack in our gut as much as we do in our ears, and our bodies feel that release of tension when the soundtracks fall silent. So I talk about the work as non-documentary because, really importantly, I am not illustrating the science, nor am I making documentary narratives of these sites or what the scientists are pursuing. The process has been incredibly interesting, and I'm enormously grateful for the generosity of the scientists who have allowed me into their spaces, who have trusted me to be in their spaces, but have also entered into a kind of a dialogue with me that really kind of pushes them out of their comfort zone and engaging in a kind of a language which is unfamiliar to them. And a lot of that process is documented on the project website, because I think, you know, it is really important that there's a kind of a sense of that underlying research. But the installations themselves, really importantly, are an experience, and they're about creating these moments of encounter. I think often art is kind of co-opted by science as a way of creating kind of outreach for scientific projects, and often the other way around as well. Artists are just as guilty of kind of going in and co-opting the kind of interesting things with science. I think the thing that I have been really interested in is kind of treating the laboratory as a kind of space of knowledge, where knowledge is constructed, and that the kind of methodologies and processes of art making are incredibly valid within that context, and just the act of looking and how one looks and how one might build knowledge through looking is really, really interesting. But it's also incredibly challenging to go into that environment and ask people in other disciplines to trust you in that process. So one of the kind of central strands of the project has been building that trust, and in a way, although it has taken place, the bulk of the work has taken place over the last 2 years, it stretches back much further, almost a decade, in terms of building those partnerships and that trust with various organisations and various personalities to kind of create that trust and create that exchange, and to identify the scientists who are really interested in a much more radical idea of exchange with an artist. So the way that knowledge is constructed through different types of looking is really important and very specific for me. So in terms of the still photography, I work almost exclusively with an old twin lens Rolleiflex from the 1950s, so analog transparency film. And really for me, the kind of restriction that gives me is really important. Obviously there's no immediacy that you have with digital technology, but also the fact that it's a kind of a fixed lens that I'm working with. So those kind of parameters are kind of influential in the way that I construct an image within the frame. But also, I think, importantly, with the moving image, often the films are very tight in, they're kind of macro shots, and the camera itself is fairly sort of still within an environment, and the action of the lathe or the microscope is kind of creating the movement in the image. Another set of language within the films is where the camera is moving, where it's on a vehicle, on a cable car, where it's moving through, around, underneath, kind of traversing spaces, almost kind of mapping spaces. So that kind of relationship between the still point and this kind of traversing camera creates a very particular dynamic in the installation itself. Beyond the kind of specific nature of the exhibitions that have come from the project, there's also a number of other activities that are much more wide-reaching in terms of the amount of people who are involved in it, and also stretching into the future in terms of the kind of aspirations of where we would like to go with this. So the project itself has been hosted by Arts Catalyst, and there's been a really interesting and important collaborative relationship with Arts Catalyst, and particularly with Nicola Triscott, the director of Arts Catalyst, to push these wider ideas about physics in culture and the culture of physics. So this kind of dichotomy of those two really interesting areas. And so we have been getting together groups of interested physicists, artists, curators, writers, thinkers, to kind of workshop these ideas. So one of the preliminary things we've done is produce a really beautiful little book called The Live Creature and Ethereal Things, Physics in Culture. And this really reflects one of the workshops that we did at the Institute of Physics that brought those different constituencies together. But I think, you know, it sort of sits as a kind of a primer for the way that this might develop in the future.